In 1973, inside a research lab in California, engineers built a computer with a mouse, on-screen windows, and little pictures you could click. It also printed with a laser and talked to other computers over a network. Nearly every device you are reading this on descends from that one machine. The company that built it was not Apple, not Microsoft, and not IBM. It was a photocopier company, and it handed the entire future away for a demo and a check it barely noticed. Welcome to the Autopsy. I am your host, the analyst who cuts open dead giants to see what killed them, and today we are opening up one of the richest, smartest companies of the 20th century. To understand the mistake, you first have to understand the money. In the 1960s, Xerox did not just sell copiers, it owned the category so completely that Xerox became a verb. The Xerox 914, its flagship copier, was one of the most profitable products in the history of American business. Cash poured in faster than the company could reasonably figure out how to spend it. So in 1970, Xerox did something genuinely visionary. It opened a research lab and told the smartest people it could find to go invent the future. That lab sat in Palo Alto, California, and it was called the Palo Alto Research Center, or PARC. PARC was 3,000 miles from Xerox headquarters on the East Coast, and that distance would turn out to matter enormously. The mandate was simple and almost reckless: build the office of the future, and do not worry about this quarter's numbers. Xerox had the money, the talent, and the freedom, which is the exact combination most companies spend their whole lives praying for. What PARC's researchers did with that freedom is, even now, staggering. By 1973, they had built a computer called the Xerox Alto. The Alto had a screen that displayed crisp black text on a white background, arranged in overlapping windows. It came with a small handheld device that slid a cursor across that screen, a mouse. You could point at a tiny picture, click, and open a program, an interaction we now casually call a graphical user interface. Nobody outside that building had ever seen a computer work this way. At the time, most computers were room-sized machines you fed with punch cards or commanded with cryptic lines of typed text. The Alto sat on a desk and simply invited you to point at what you wanted. And PARC did not stop at the screen. The same lab invented the laser printer, which could reproduce anything on that screen with perfect fidelity. It built Ethernet, the networking standard that still wires up offices and data centers today. It developed what you see is what you get editing, where the document on the screen matched the printed page exactly. Any single one of these inventions could have anchored a billion-dollar business. PARC produced all of them, in the same building, over roughly the same handful of years. The Alto was, by a conservative estimate, a full decade ahead of anything else on the planet. And here's where the autopsy gets uncomfortable. Xerox built perhaps 2,000 Altos, but almost all of them went to its own offices and a few universities. The company never sold the Alto as a mainstream commercial product. To understand why, you have to look back east to the executives who actually controlled the money. Those executives ran a copier company, and they thought like a copier company. Their entire mental model of a good business was a machine that sat in an office and charged a fee for every single page it produced. A personal computer did not fit that model, so they genuinely struggled to see the point of it. When PARC demonstrated the future, headquarters saw an expensive science project, not a product line. There is a famous and telling detail from inside Xerox in this era. The company was so wedded to paper that it reportedly viewed the paperless office its own lab was inventing as a threat to the core business. This is the innovator's dilemma in its purest, most textbook form. A company's greatest strength, its profitable core, becomes the exact blind spot that hides the next revolution from view. Xerox was not run by fools. It was run by successful people defending a spectacularly successful business. That is precisely what makes the failure so instructive and so easy to repeat. Now we arrive at the moment everyone remembers, the one that usually gets told wrong. In December 1979, a young Steve Jobs led a small group of Apple engineers to PARC. Apple at this point was a fast-growing startup getting ready to go public. This was not a break-in, and it was not theft, whatever the legends have told you. It was a negotiated trade, and Xerox agreed to it with its eyes wide open. In exchange for the demonstration, Xerox's venture arm was allowed to buy roughly 100,000 shares of pre-IPO Apple stock. The price was about $10.50 per share, an investment of around $1 million. So Xerox showed Apple its crown jewels, and in return, it got to buy a stake in Apple. On paper, sitting in that room in 1979, it looked like a reasonable deal for both sides. Then the PARC engineers turned the machine on. Jobs watched a cursor glide across the screen, windows overlap, and a pointing device do the work that typing used to do. By his own later account, he was so dazzled by the graphical interface that he barely registered the two other revolutions PARC showed him that same day. He saw the future in about 10 minutes, and he understood the one thing Xerox's own leadership never did. This was how everyone would eventually want to use a computer. Jobs walked out of that building on fire. Here is where fairness matters because the popular story flattens it into a simple heist. Apple did not just photocopy the Alto and slap its own logo on it. What PARC had built was a brilliant and completely unaffordable research prototype. Apple's engineers took the core ideas and spent years doing the unglamorous work of turning them into something an ordinary person could buy and actually use. PARC's mouse had 3 buttons and cost hundreds of dollars to build. Apple redesigned it into a single-button mouse that cost around $15. Apple also invented interface elements PARC never had, including the pull-down menus that drop cleanly from the top of the screen. It refined the windows, the feel of dragging things around, and the general polish that made the whole thing seem effortless. In plain terms, Xerox invented the idea, and Apple invented the product. Both of those things are true, and both of them matter to the verdict. Apple's first attempt was the Lisa, released in 1983, a graphical computer that was powerful but priced far out of reach. Then, in 1984, Apple shipped the Macintosh. The Macintosh put the mouse and the graphical interface into a friendly box that regular people could afford and understand. It did not just sell a computer, it defined how computers would look and feel for the next 40 years. Microsoft soon walked the same road with Windows, and the graphical interface became the water the entire industry now swims in. Every one of those products traces its bloodline straight back to that lab in Palo Alto. So what, you might reasonably ask, was Xerox itself doing during all of this? To be fair to Xerox, it did eventually try to sell the future it had built. In 1981, Xerox released a commercial product called the Star. The Star was a genuine graphical workstation with a mouse, windows, and icons aimed squarely at the office market. In several respects, it was more polished and more complete than the Macintosh that came after it. But the Star cost around $16,000 per unit, and it was designed to be sold in expensive multi-machine systems. It was priced like a mainframe in a world that was about to fall completely in love with cheap personal computers. The Star sold poorly, and Xerox never recovered its lead. The company that started the race with a 10-year head start finished it in the stands. By the mid-1980s, the personal computer revolution belonged to Apple, to Microsoft, and to IBM. Xerox, which had invented the whole thing, was reduced to a footnote in its own story. Now let us do the accounting, because the numbers here are their own kind of dark comedy. Remember that $1 million stake in pre-IPO Apple stock. As Apple grew, that investment ballooned into many millions of dollars, so on that single line item, Xerox actually came out ahead. And that detail is exactly what makes this case so painful. The stock profit was real, but it was pocket change measured against what Xerox truly gave away. What Xerox surrendered was not $1 million, it was the founding position in the personal computer industry. It was decades of the laser printing, networking, and computing markets it had invented and could have owned outright. The lesson of PARC is not that Xerox failed to invent, because it invented more than almost anyone in history. The lesson is that invention without commercialization is worth precisely nothing on the balance sheet. A great idea trapped inside a company that cannot see it is functionally identical to no idea at all. Xerox had all the genius, it simply lacked the imagination to sell it, and imagination was the one thing all that copier money could not buy. The company did not die that day, and it still exists, but the empire it could have built quietly went to other people. So here is the cause of death for the record. A cash cow grown so comfortable that it could not recognize the future its own scientists had set down, gently, on its desk. If you enjoy watching brilliant companies trip over their own success, subscribe to Corporate Autopsy, because there is always another giant on the table, and I still have plenty of scalpels left.